Pere, 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 pere. Pere, 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 pere. Gotcha.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Crap Café. Today, we're going to do our best to get to the bottom of one of Elbaph's biggest mysteries and finally unravel the secrets of the mysterious Heavenly Realm. Because ever since the start of the arc, Oda has introduced us to the concept of the 3 layers of Elbaf, starting with the underworld, the bottom layer of Warland, composed of a massive frozen wasteland, home to Loki and many primordial beasts. The Sun Realm, home to the royal castle and 4 main villages of Elbaf, a whole world resting atop the interwoven branches of the Atom Tree. But what about the final realm of Elbaf, the Heavenly Realm, the highest realm within all of Warland? What is its purpose, and why has Oda been so secretive that he's refused to even show it in panel? And with every character that's been set up for the arc already introduced, and the literal god king of the island living within a castle in the Sun Realm, there's really nothing and no one we could expect to see in the Heavenly Realm. So what's going to be its final purpose in the story? And is there any way for us to unravel this cryptic mystery? Well, not only do I think that I cracked a secret to the Heavenly Realm and the direction for the end of Elbaf, but in doing so, I think I may have finally found the location of one of the most elusive islands in all of the One Piece world, the legendary Lodestar Island, allegedly only ever found by Gol D. Roger, the Pirate King himself. So go grab a fork and go grab a knife, because I promise that this theory is going to be out of this world. Now, first things first, class, in order to get to the bottom of this heavenly mystery, I'd like you to go ahead and open up your textbooks and flip all the way back to the beginning of the Skypiea arc, where we got this interesting interaction with God Gonfall that's had many fans, including myself, theorizing for over the past 20 years. Because you see, upon his first interaction with the gang, Gonfall would reveal that, like usual, the Straw Hats managed to choose the hardest and most dangerous path possible to arrive in Skypiea, or more aptly, the White Sea as a whole. And he states that there is actually another, much more commonly used route to enter the White Sea, and that typically, you need to island hop from at least 1 to 2 other Sky Islands before you can normally arrive at Skypiea, the country that exists on the Imperial Cumulus Cloud floating above Jaya. But that was really all we ever learned about this location. But given that it's clearly alluded to being located further along in the Grand Line, once we entered the New World, the community began searching for any tall object that could possibly be considered the summit of High West. And by the time we got to Big Mom's flashback and saw the subtle teases of the giant tree in the background, the community had pretty much locked in on the Atom Tree of Elbaf being the summit of High West. And despite there being no reference to High West or traveling to other Sky Islands so far in the arc, I believe that Oda has been secretly dropping details in the background of the story that can not only prove once and for all that Elbaf and the summit of High West are one and the same, but also perfectly explains the process and method for safely traversing the White Sea. Well, first off, the most obvious W for this theory is the fact that Elbaf is actually able to support an island cloud atmosphere, visually connecting the 2 arcs and thematically closing the loop on the Jack and the Beanstalk themes from Skypiea. But looking back towards Gonfall's statement, he mentions needing to traverse from at least 1 to 2 other Sky Islands to arrive at Skypiea. But given the nature of the floating islands, not only are they constantly moving, but they are also located vast distances away from each other. And this fact has always made the notion of traversing the White Sea very confusing, as how would you even manage to travel over such vast distances over open air? Well, thankfully, I think that Oda somehow managed to sneakily explain this decade-long mystery over the course of just a few short panels, as I believe that Oda has officially introduced a second form of coding in the One Piece world. As you see, after the gang got a chance to explore the giant island, we get a brief shot of the Slavar, a mist ship that moves using island clouds, and it allows the ship to literally fly through the sky with sea clouds attached to rowing paddles. And this isn't a one-off either, as Oda made a point to show that this technique could be applied to literally any ship in the wider One Piece world, as the Sylvar wasn't the only ship we saw receive this sea cloud coating. In the giant warrior pirate's enormous ship, the Great Air was also outfitted with this upgrade and flown through the sky. So if even a giant ship packed with full-grown giants can be supported by the mist cloud coating, I believe that just about any ship in the series could pretty easily add these modifications in order to traverse the sky and the white seas. And the Marigo's Flying Mary upgrade from Skypiea could have been alluding to legitimate flying ship upgrades coming later on in the series. And now, I'm convinced that the proper route to arrive in Skypiea would have been for the crew to have traveled to the New World, arrived at Elbaf, received a mist cloud coating, and sail off to the first Sky Island pit stop along the way before eventually arriving at Skypiea. So now that we can prove that Elbaf is at the very least an access point to the White Sea that's incredibly high up and west of Skypiea, does that solve our heavenly mystery? Is the final tier of Elbaf going to be the summit of High West in the true entrance to the White Seas? Well, unfortunately no. And don't get me wrong, I do believe that Elbaf is in fact the summit of High West, but I just don't think that's all Elbaf has to offer. Because when you look back to the very panels that introduce the mist coating and validate the summit of High West theory, there's actually one subtle detail that's managed to add even more of a mystery to the heavenly realm. Because while you may not remember, we actually have some pretty precise measurements for the atmospheric heights required for island and sea clouds to exist. And we were told that the White Sea sits at a height of roughly 7,000 meters, and that the White Sea sits at a height of roughly 10,000 meters. But what makes this relevant is the fact that I believe that this one statement allows us to estimate the height of the realms of the Atom Tree. Because if you recall, earlier in Elbaf, Haruden and some of the other members of the New Giant Warrior Pirates were rushing to stop Luffy from freeing Loki, and we saw a scene in which they descended into the underworld, and their mist cloud coating disappeared due to the change in atmospheric pressure. And since we know that the White Sea bottoms out at around 7,000 meters, we can estimate that the bottom of the branches of the Sun Realm are roughly 7,000 meters high, as Haruden's ship fell as soon as they dipped below the branches of the Sun Realm and entered the underworld. And by then, drawing a line at our 7,000 meters mark, we can estimate that the bottom of the branches of the Heavenly Realm should be around the 10,000 meter mark of the White Sea. Yet it seems that the Heavenly Realm will continue to tower even above that. So unless there's a third White Sea further up that we haven't heard of, the level of the White Sea should also have some sort of upward limit. As in the same way that island clouds can't keep their form from below the 7,000 meter height of the White Sea, after a certain elevation, there simply wouldn't be enough atmospheric pressure for even clouds to form. The same is in our real world. So if these simple calculations are correct, it looks as though the Heavenly Realm could break through the cloud barrier and reach into a new world altogether. In fact, if you take a peek at the mural that Vegapunk and Frankie just recently discovered, I think that there's some hints alluding to just that. Because if you look closely, it appears that the branches of the Atom Tree extend into space itself, as not only do the branches come straight past the biggest moon in the mural, but they also encroach into the shaded region, along with the other, rather lore-accurate, smaller celestial bodies. In fact, what if that's what the Heavenly Realm has meant this entire time? It's unlikely that Oda will repeat the trope of heaven once again in the story, as Skypiea was littered with references to angels, gods, and priests. So what if the heavenly in this case wasn't in reference to heaven in the religious sense, but instead the celestial and heavenly bodies that orbit the One Piece planet? I believe that after this climactic battle with Emu and the Holy Knights, the Straw Hat crew is going to be climbing to the final tier of Elbaf. And finally, after 20 years of hoping, praying, and dreaming, I believe that we're finally going to the moon. Now, if you're anime only, this part of the video might come as a bit of a shock to you, because Oda has actually been setting up this eventual moon arc since I was about 6 years old. Now, if you look back to the end of Skypiea, when NL sailed off to the moon, laughing maniacally, many anime-only fans assumed his crazy ass was about to go off and suffocate in space. But it appears as though the One Piece world, or at least planet, is a little different. And while it wasn't shown in the anime, which was probably a poor choice in hindsight, we did get to see the results of NL's journey, and actually saw him manage to arrive at his destination, and got to watch an entire moon adventure play out, with everything from him amassing an army of adorable costumed robots, massive Skypiea reveals, technologically advanced ancient moon cities, and even alien space pirates. So if you haven't skimmed through it yet, I highly recommend it. But for some time, most of this info and story has felt rather disconnected from the rest of the narrative, and many fans felt that space exploration was either a joke by Oda or something that he may have wanted to do but would never have time to actually explore in the series. But I, along with many other true believers, always hoped that one day a time would come when we would finally get to learn more about space and the moons of the One Piece world. Because not only does that cover story allude to being able to access celestial objects like the moon of Burka by simply riding balloons above the cloud layer, but it appears as though there's also some sort of atmosphere that allows them to support life. As unless somebody tells Enel that he needs to breathe, he seems to be doing just fine. And outside of their pressure suits, the space aliens also seem to be able to survive on the moon as well. Additionally, when you consider that the space pirates' mining operation and spaceships imply that they came from a separate moon altogether, this always alluded to a whole other world above the White Sea that we've yet to explore. And I think there's some very interesting ties between this cover story and the current events in the story. Starting with the fact that if Elbaf is truly the summit of High West, an entrance to the outer worlds, this arc could serve as the perfect spiritual successor to Skypiea, as High West was foreshadowed at the start of the arc, and the last shot was Enel flying off to the moon. Secondly, per the cover story, the automata that flew up to the moon of Burka were created by Professor Tsukimi from Karakuri Island, the hometown of Dr. Vegapunk, and the location that Frankie studied during the 2-year timeskip. But once they arrived on the moon, Enel unearthed an entire colony of already existing automata hidden within the moon, linking ancient Karakuri Island and its scientific geniuses to space travel in the moon city of Burka. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Vegapunk came here with us to Elbaf, and it was even he and Frankie who found the mural that shows the Atom Tree extending past the moon. And lastly, ever since the start of Egghead, Oda has been teasing a lot of space-related terminology, such as Vegapunk's satellites, a term for smaller orbiting bodies such as moons, the fact that the 5 elder stars should probably be translated closer to 5 elder planets, as their names all pertain to planets in our solar system, such as St. Marcus Mars, St. Jude Peter, and St. Ethan bearing Venus Juno. And just recently during the King Harold flashback, we learned of the Pole Star, seemingly an equivalent to the North Star in the real world. But even if the events of the narrative and some of the recent terminologies are pointing to the moon and celestial bodies, how exactly can we expect to get there? Even if the top of the Atom Tree extends into space itself, it would be incredibly unlikely that a moon would just so happen to orbit directly overhead so that the crew could all climb aboard. That being said, that is essentially what happened back in Jaya, as not only was there an incredibly powerful knock-up stream coming the morning after they arrived, but the Imperial Cumulus cloud that holds Skypiea also just so happened to be in the area. So it is definitely possible for something incredibly plot convenient to happen. But I just don't think Oda plans to take the easy route. And instead, I think he's already been secretly setting up everything required for space travel at the start of the arc. Now, it's already been established that you could simply float to the moon, but as I mentioned, the mist cloud coating will more than likely fade after a high enough elevation, restraining it to use within the 7,000 to, let's say, 13,000 meter range. And if you look at the way that Enel and the automata traveled to Burka, it was through the use of helium balloons and an electrically powered flying ship, and not through the use of mist cloud coating. So if the Straw Hat Gang is going to have to travel for any distance in space, they need something more powerful than mist coating, right? What if I told you that upon the very introduction and explanation of the mist cloud ships, Oda was already teasing how the Straw Hats were going to be able to safely navigate space without plummeting back to Earth? because there was an incredibly subtle detail mentioned by Vegapunk that a lot of people ignored at the time, but stuck out to me as rather odd. You see, looking back to the first panel of the Mist Ships, Vegapunk explains that it's only possible because of Elbaph's perfect climate, and how it can support everything from islands and sea clouds, rainbow bridges, as well as Sabao bubbles. Now, at the time, this stuck out to me as rather odd, and I briefly went to reread the first few chapters, because despite seeing the rainbow bridges and sea clouds, we've never once seen a Sabao bubble on the island. So now, with this current theory in mind, I believe that this was an inclusion by Oda to prepare to go to the moon at the end of the arc, because now that we know that your typical bubble coating is also possible on this island, it gives us the perfect explanation for how the Straw Hats will be able to safely travel through space. Because if you were to use mist coating in combination with bubble coating, you'd be able to successfully protect yourself from the change in outside pressure, the same way the bubbles protect you from the massive amount of pressure on your way to Fishman Island at the bottom of the ocean. So if the atmospheric change is solved, if the ship was then given the mist cloud coating simultaneously, it should be fully capable of sustaining itself and supporting the ship indefinitely on their space adventure. So now that we've established a possible access point to space, or the Black Sea, whatever the community decides to call it, and we also have a means of creating a flying ship capable of traversing space itself, where exactly will we be going? Because despite all the setup from NL's space adventure, it's unlikely that we'll be going to the moon of Burka. Not only because its secrets have largely been explored, but based on the mural and diagram model on Ohara, the One Piece world has been confirmed to have several orbiting satellites, or moons. So there's a 5 out of 6 chance that it'll be a brand new moon that we've yet to explore. But once again, I think that Oda may have already given us just enough hints within the recent mural and some of the lore drops in the King Herald flashback to decipher exactly where our next destination will be. And if everything that I'm theorizing turns out to be true, we might be heading to one of the most elusive and legendary islands within all the One Piece world, second only to the island of Laugh-Tale and the One Piece itself, the legendary Lodestar Island. Now, ever since we arrived on Zou and learned the mystery of the road poneglyphs and the ever-elusive Lodestar Island, the community has been speculating about everything from why no one other than Roger was able to find it, to if we'd even need to go there at all now that we already know about the 4 road poneglyphs. Well, not only do I believe that after the arc, the Straw Hats are going to follow in Roger's footsteps and be the next confirmed crew to find Lodestar Island, but I also believe that we'll actually be headed there much sooner than we initially anticipated. And while many fans might not be ready to accept that we're already close enough to the red line again to even be thinking about going to Lodestar, I think it's important to note, now that we've finally reached Elbaf, the only islands that we know of in the New World that are yet to be explored are Laugh-Tale and Lodestar. Even the current biggest looming mystery in the series, the mysterious man marked by flames, is known for roaming around by the red line. So it certainly appears, to me at least, that we've definitely begun to approach the end of the Grand Line. And I think all the clues needed to prove that Lodestar will be our next destination were contained within the recent mural and one subtle lore drop from Oda during the King Herald flashback. And by using some deductive reasoning, I think it's clear that all the evidence is pointing towards a single direction. To begin, there was a recent lore drop during the King Herald flashback that caused me to question just about everything I thought I knew about Lodestar Island. Because King Herald was shown educating what certainly appears to be Shimotsuki Kozuboto's sailing party from Wano, and he teaches them how to navigate the Grand Line without the use of a log pose. And for the very first time, we learned of the Pole Star, the brightest star in the night sky, which never moves and is fixed in a due north position, making it incredibly useful for navigation. Now, this statement did a few things. First, it actually introduced a bit of a retcon, as when the gang entered the Grand Line, Crocus told us that the only way to navigate would be through the use of a log post, as compasses go haywire in the Grand Line. But frankly, I think Oda made up for that retcon by patching up a plot hole most of us didn't even notice. As now, we actually have a way for Shimotsuki Kozuboto and his sailing party from Wano to have successfully navigated their way out of the New World. where he and the 19 other Winoans would eventually go on to form Shimotsuki Village in the east. And if you saw my theory video, solving Zoro and Tashigi's connection, you'd know that there's a good chance that they'd also go on to form the Oikot Kingdom as well, the same island where Bellmare found Nami, and where I believe Tashigi might have been born. But the very last impact of the introduction of Polestar is what pertains to our theory today, as I think it's remarkable just how similar the names of Polestar and the island of Lodestar are, because it's not just the fact that they're spelled almost identically. But if you've never been interested in astronomy, you may not know the meaning of the terms Polestar and Lodestar, but they are incredibly tied together in the world of astronavigation. As a polestar, like I mentioned before, is a star or celestial object that is closely aligned with the planet's northern pole. And the real-world equivalent would be our current North Star, Polaris, which humans have been using to navigate the world for millennia. But what you may not know is that a lodestar is almost the exact same thing, and the term lodestar can apply to any celestial object that can be used for navigation, not exclusively a northern star like the term polestar. So in our real world, Polaris, our polestar, is also the most commonly used lodestar for navigation, and I believe that Oda is intentionally leaning into this wordplay, and is hinting that Lodestar Island will in fact be the polestar that King Harold mentioned in his flashback, as a lodestar or polestar doesn't even have to be a star at all, as the terms simply refer to the brightest objects in the night sky, and at times other planets such as Mars and Venus can be lodestars used to navigate as well. So what if Lodestar wasn't an island in the usual sense at all, but instead a formerly inhabited moon, like the island of Burka? Because if Lodestar Island was in fact one of the 6 moons of Blue Star and the pole star of the planet, tidally locked over the north, it could connect the pieces of this puzzle together perfectly. As not only would Lodestar Island being an orbiting moon explain its astrological name, but it could perfectly explain why Roger was the first known pirate to find it, as even if you were already aware of the Sky Islands and miscoding, by the time you reach the end of the Grand Line, very few men would ever dream of looking past the white sea into the moons of the planet itself. And once you take a moment to consider the first name we were given for Lodestar Island and look back to the mural, I think it's clear that this has been Oda's intention from the start. As even though there are 6 moons orbiting the One Piece world, I think we can actually find the location of Lodestar Island, the Polestar moon. And I believe that we can almost immediately narrow our sights from all 6 moons to the 3 moons in the mural that are prominently shown to be within reach of the Atom Tree. Now, the first moon in the mural is the largest, but lowest of all 3 moons, and happens to look the most like our own moon in the real world. However, the smaller second and third moons have some rather unique designs, with the second to highest moon displaying several large clover-like patterns that could potentially be massive impact craters, and the third, the highest moon of all, sporting a very interesting stripe or road-like pattern that appears to mimic the exact same pattern as the massive fire-breathing serpent from the mural. Now, starting off, I believe that the first and most easily identifiable moon in the mural is Burka, and you can tell both by its proximity to a flying ship that looks almost identical to Enel's, but also the moon that Enel flew off to was his dream world of endless birth. And much like the moon in the mural and in our world, the big moon has a rocky, barren landscape, void of anything but the occasional impact crater, and its appearance aligns with Burka almost perfectly. But then what about the 2 other smaller moons? Is there a way we can possibly identify which of these celestial bodies will be the polestar and the location of Lodestar Island? Well, if you look back to the very introduction of the island of Lodestar itself, you may pick up on a rather interesting detail that pertains directly to what we're seeing in the mural. Because upon its introduction, the island of Lodestar wasn't called Lodestar at all, but instead it was romanized as Roadstar Island. Now, when it was first introduced, this made perfect sense, as a roadstar would have been the location where you learned about the road poneglyphs. But by the time we learned a little bit more about the island during Oden's flashback, it was being translated as Lodestar Island. And translation differences like these are very common, especially with Japanese, as the language has a shared RL sound. And this is the reason that the island of Raftel that we were introduced to at the start of the Grand Line later went on to become known as the island of Laugh Tale. But what if Lodestar wasn't a mistaken translation, but a double meaning that serves as an actual description of the island? Because when you look at the highest of all 3 moons in the mural, you'll notice the distinctive road-like pattern that I mentioned before. And while we can't confirm that this is a real road, it is clear that we were meant to notice it, as the serpent also shares this exact same pattern. And Lodestar could simply be a nickname used to describe the appearance of the moon. And if the pole star has truly been used by the giants for generations, it would certainly make sense for it to be well known enough to be included in the child's artwork, especially if it's a common sight in the Elbaphian night sky. And with this final piece of the puzzle in place, it's clear to me at least that Lodestar Island will be the striped moon from the mural, and the Straw Hat's next destination. Which of course would mean that after Oda ties up this climactic battle with Imu, that we'll be headed to one of the in-game islands of the series, and finally kicking off the beginning of what is almost certainly going to be one of the greatest series finales in anime history. But like always, let me know in the comments, what do you think? Will Polestar and Lodestar Island turn out to be one and the same? Is Elbaf the fabled summit of High West? And do you think we're finally going to the moon after all these years of waiting? Personally, I'll be crushed if we never end up going to the moon, or at least getting to learn more about the history of the moons in the One Piece world. But I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. So if you enjoyed this theory, or I at least kept you entertained while you ate your food, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more of my delicious theories. I've really been appreciating all the love and support that the videos I've been getting these past few months, and I just have to say thank you once again to everyone who's decided to subscribe and keep coming back to this crappy establishment. And if you enjoyed this theory video, you'll probably enjoy some of my other content. So check out my latest video where I go over exactly why I believe that Usopp is a DOSUNDADA, the recently revealed cross between a human and a Tontada. And it might just hold the answer to finally solving the mystery behind Usopp's long nose. Or if you'd like to see me attempt to solve one of the biggest mysteries within all of the series, go watch my recent theory on Blackbeard, where I attempt to solve everything from the mystery behind the dark fruit's tangibility to how Blackbeard is able to steal devil fruits, and even the mystery behind his connection to Rocksteady's effect and his alleged split personalities. So like usual, if you made it here to the end of the video, please leave a comment that you finished off your plate, and I'll make sure to give each and every one of you a personal thank you in the comments below. And I already have my next theory video simmering in the crock pot, so make sure to subscribe and ring that dinner bell if you want to keep up with the channel. But that's all for now. Thank you for coming to the Crap Cafe.
Gotcha.